She always knew something was wrong, not in loud moments, but in the silences. The way her husband's eyes lingered just a second too long when she mentioned her father's name. The way the boardroom would pause, just briefly, whenever she entered. She was the wife, the beautiful one, the quiet one, the one everyone smiled at, but no one really saw. Until one morning she woke up, and the company her parents built was no longer hers. Her name had been stripped, her trust betrayed, her life rewritten. They thought she'd run forever. They thought she'd vanish quietly. But they forgot one thing. Behind every calm wife, there's a storm waiting. And now, she isn't running anymore. She's watching. She's listening. And this time, she's coming back with more than memories. She's coming back with proof. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads at first glance. Graceful, yes. Refined, undoubtedly. But there was a quietness to her presence, a kind of self-containment that set her apart from the more exuberant women in her social circle. It was as if she moved through life, calculating every word, every look, every pause, not out of fear, but out of learned caution, the sort that comes from growing up in a world where silence could be misinterpreted and confidence could be punished. At 32, Eleanor carried the weight of a family name steeped in legacy and expectation, only daughter to a revered constitutional law professor and a classically trained painter. She had been raised in a home where intellect, poise, and duty were prized above all else. The Whitmores were old money from New England, the kind who didn't flaunt wealth, but wielded it with quiet precision. She graduated from Yale with a degree in political science, her father's idea, and pursued a master's in art history at Columbia, her own. Eleanor preferred libraries over luncheons, manuscripts over magazines, and had a particular affection for 18th century portraiture. She was the kind of woman who always knew the right thing to say, and yet rarely said it. Her feelings were carefully shelved, her desires postponed. Her marriage to Nathaniel Ashford, heir to Ashford Freight and Logistics, was less of a love story and more of a well-scripted merger. The union of the Whitmore and Ashford families had made quiet waves in Boston's upper crust, discreet nods at gallery openings, congratulatory murmurs in country club hallways. For the Ashfords, Eleanor was a stamp of legitimacy, an anchor of culture and credibility. For the Whitmores, whose financial stability had quietly faltered after her father's unexpected death, Nathaniel represented continuity and survival. At first, Nathaniel was everything he needed to be. Handsome, articulate, Harvard-educated, he carried the kind of practiced charm that came from generations of prep schools and private tutors. Reeling from grief, Eleanor mistook his structure for safety, and for a while, she told herself it was enough, that comfort was a kind of love, and that romance was for those who hadn't yet faced life's realities. But security has its shadows, and soon, those shadows stretched longer than the light. Nathaniel began traveling more, business in Hong Kong, conferences in Geneva, board meetings in New York. The house grew quieter, the dinners shorter, and the distance between them, once circumstantial, became intentional. She noticed his eyes no longer lingered. His touch became perfunctory. And then came the smiles, the ones he gave freely, but never to her. Still, Eleanor remained composed. She did not raise her voice, nor make accusations. She stayed the course, attended the charity events, signed the thank you notes, wore the diamond bracelet he'd given her on their second anniversary, even though she hadn't seen him that day. But she felt it. The shift. The night she returned early from visiting her mother in Providence and smelled a foreign perfume lingering in their bedroom hallway. She felt it. The dinner party where Nathaniel laughed, a genuine, effortless laugh, with a woman she hadn't met before. She saw it in the way he touched her elbow, the same way he used to guide Eleanor through crowds. But she said nothing, because she was still the wife, the legal wife, the name on the deed, the figure in the family portrait. And while the cracks in the marble were invisible to most, Eleanor could feel them beneath her skin, spreading slowly, silently, like frost on glass. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Eleanor had agreed, against her better judgment, to attend the Ashford Foundation's charity brunch, the kind of event where no one eats, everyone poses, and the smiles are more rehearsed than the speeches. It was held at the Langston Estate, a sprawling property in the hills of Litchfield County, Connecticut. White tents, crystal glasses, lobster canapes no one touched. The type of elegance that smelled more like formality than celebration. Nathaniel hadn't come. Of course not. He was delayed in Chicago, yet again. She stood by the edge of the patio, watching women in floral silk dresses compare jewelry and Botox referrals, while hedge fund heirs discussed offshore accounts over champagne. Eleanor was used to the emptiness of those afternoons, had trained herself to float above them, like a ghost still fulfilling social duties, but today felt different. There was a low murmur behind her, a hush that grew too quickly, eyes turning, phones half lowered. Then someone gasped. Eleanor turned, instinctively straightening her back. Walking across the garden lawn, hand in hand, was Nathaniel, and beside him, radiant, laughing, unapologetically close, was Madeline Scott, a publicist, 27, blonde, ambitious, the kind of woman Eleanor would never envy under normal circumstances. But here, now, with Nathaniel's hand loosely resting on the small of her back, that image was electric. Madeline looked directly at Eleanor and smiled. Not an accidental smile. Not polite, but the kind of smile that said, "I know everything, and you know I know." Nathaniel paused for the briefest second. Their eyes met. Then he turned back to Madeline as if Eleanor were part of the scenery. The humiliation didn't scream. It didn't spill wine on her dress or slap her across the face. It whispered, like a blade pressed slowly to the skin. Eleanor did not cry. She did not run. She nodded graciously to the next woman who passed by, made a comment about the weather, and stepped away from the crowd. Her heels tapped against the marble path with the same elegance as always. No tremor in her voice, no redness in her cheeks. But inside, something snapped. Quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the display. The message Nathaniel had sent. Loud and clear, in front of everyone who mattered. You're no longer untouchable. You're no longer even relevant. That night, alone in the townhouse, Eleanor poured herself a glass of red wine and sat at the foot of the bed. She didn't turn on the lights, didn't play music. She simply stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror across the room. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to whisper a question she had buried under routines and rationalizations. Who am I when I'm not his wife? The train ride from New York to upstate Connecticut was quiet. Too quiet for someone whose life had just imploded in public view. But Eleanor welcomed the silence. She didn't check her phone. She didn't open her email. She didn't respond to the frantic messages from her mother, or the cold, predictable text from Nathaniel. Let's talk when things settle down. Settle down? Things weren't settling. They were crumbling. 3 days after the charity brunch, she left the Ashford townhouse without announcement. Just one suitcase. No driver. No staff. She took the train like everyone else, like the woman she used to be, before silk robes and silent dinners. Her destination wasn't random. It was Maplewood, a small, chilly town nestled in the Berkshires, where her family had once owned a modest lake house, long sold, long forgotten. But the town itself had always stayed in her memory like a photo at the back of a drawer. Eleanor had spent summers there as a teenager, before the world got too sharp and too expensive. This time, she wasn't staying at a lake house. She had rented a room above a diner. Maplewood Diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 20 years. Wooden booths, checkered floors, a chalkboard with the daily pie flavors scribbled in uneven handwriting. The smell of butter, burnt coffee, and something sweet always baking in the kitchen. It was warm, real, a place where no one whispered behind napkins or asked about hedge funds. The room upstairs was small but clean. A slanted ceiling, a single window facing the woods, and a creaky twin bed with a faded quilt. There was no closet, just a metal rack with hangers. Eleanor hung 3 dresses and folded the rest. For the first time in years, her wardrobe fit inside a single drawer. The diner's owner, Mrs. Landry, was a widow in her 60s with thick glasses and a kindness that didn't ask questions. She offered Eleanor a job before she could even ask. Part-time, minimum wage. Just until you get your bearings, sweetheart. Eleanor accepted. Her first morning behind the counter, she spilled coffee on a customer's lap. The man laughed. No one demanded to speak to her manager. No one took a photo. No one cared about the last name Ashford, because here, it meant nothing. The town itself was a collage of small joys and quiet sadness. Retired couples walked their dogs without hurrying. Teenagers rode rusted bikes down cracked sidewalks. The bookstore had a bell that jingled every time someone entered, and the florist down the street left buckets of discounted roses out front when the day got too hot. Maplewood was not glamorous, but it was honest. Each day Eleanor spent in that town felt like peeling off a layer of someone she no longer recognized. No makeup, no headlines, no husband. And yet, Nathaniel's shadow lingered. Though the town was quiet, the Ashford name wasn't entirely forgotten. People remembered the company's trucks passing through during expansion years. Some even remembered Eleanor's last name, Whitmore, with respect. A few asked questions she gently avoided. Others just looked at her with quiet curiosity, as if sensing that her elegance came from a world far removed from theirs. But no one pried, not until he walked in. It was a Tuesday morning, late summer, the air still crisp from the night, the sky painted in a soft watercolor of blues and golds. Eleanor was wiping down the counter when the diner door swung open, and the bell rang twice. The man who entered didn't belong to that town, and yet he moved like he did. Tall, broad shoulders, faded jeans, a leather jacket that had seen too many roads. He had a duffel bag slung over one arm, a tired smile, and eyes that noticed everything. He sat at the far end of the counter and said, "Black coffee, and whatever's hot." Eleanor poured the coffee. He looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. In that silence, something shifted. Again. Maplewood might have been the place Eleanor ran to, but it was about to become the place where everything changed. For a town so small, Maplewood had no shortage of personalities. And Eleanor, now working 5 shifts a week at the diner, became a quiet observer of each one, even as some began to take an interest in her far sooner than she'd expected. Mrs. Landry, the diner owner, was equal parts warmth and grit. She was the first to call Eleanor Elle, the nickname sticking before Eleanor had the chance to reject or embrace it. Mrs. Landry didn't ask questions, but her knowing looks carried weight. She was a woman who had seen loss, pride, survival, and recognized all three in Eleanor's guarded expression. Though kind, she had rules, and didn't hesitate to correct mistakes with a sharp tongue cloaked in grandmotherly charm. She kept Eleanor grounded, but also subtly challenged her. "You've got hands made for books, not coffee pots," she once said. "But sometimes we need to scrub the floor before we remember how to stand." Then there was Lena, a waitress barely 21, with turquoise-dyed hair and a nose ring she removed only when the town pastor came in. She had a talent for reading people, and no patience for liars. At first, she viewed Eleanor as some kind of fallen heiress playing poor. "You one of those sad divorcees hiding out from drama?" she asked bluntly on Eleanor's second day. Eleanor didn't answer. That somehow earned Lena's respect. From that day on, Lena became a reluctant ally, sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, and the first to speak up when customers got too nosy. But not everyone was welcoming. Irene Carter, the mayor's wife and local gossip matriarch, had eyes everywhere. She'd never worked a day in her life and treated Maplewood like her personal chessboard. Irene had a soft spot for appearances and a sixth sense for secrets. It didn't take her long to begin prodding at Eleanor's identity. "You have that East Coast look," she said, during a brunch Eleanor served. Graceful, quiet, a little tragic. She smiled as she stirred her tea. "I imagine there's a very expensive story behind those eyes." Rumors started to swirl. No one in town really knew who Eleanor was, but speculation was currency in Maplewood. Some believed she was a widow. Others whispered she was hiding from a scandal. A few insisted she was a writer doing immersive research for a novel. The more she refused to explain, the more intriguing she became, and Irene fed on that intrigue. Then came Deputy Ross. Officially, he was just a patrol officer for Maplewood's tiny sheriff's department. Unofficially, he was Irene's nephew, and not the harmless kind. He came into the diner more often than necessary, his smile always too wide, his questions just shy of inappropriate. "So, Eleanor, that your real name?" he asked one morning, tapping the edge of his coffee mug. "Funny thing, there's a woman with your same face in an old Ashford press photo I saw once. You any relation?" She didn't blink. No, but his grin said he didn't believe her. Ross made her skin crawl, not because he knew anything concrete, but because men like him didn't need facts. They just needed leverage. And Eleanor, in her quiet exile, was fresh meat in a small pond. Through it all, only one person seemed uninterested in her past. The man from Tuesday, whose name she would later learn was Caleb Wright, returned to the diner every morning. Always black coffee, always alone. He didn't flirt, didn't pry. Sometimes he'd sit for hours reading the paper or scribbling in a notebook. But his presence was steady, quiet, the kind of presence you forget to be cautious around. That, of course, made him dangerous in his own way, because Eleanor, despite her guard, began to wait for him. Mrs. Landry noticed first. "That man's got baggage," she said, wiping a dish. "You've got yours. Don't go unpacking his before you're done with your own." But hearts, unlike suitcases, don't follow checklists. And the town of Maplewood, for all its charm, was beginning to wrap its vines around Eleanor's carefully guarded silence. Some vines offered comfort. Others were just waiting to tighten. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day where the sky stayed gray from morning to dusk, and the air smelled like it couldn't quite decide between rain or frost. Business at the diner was slow. Eleanor had already restocked the sugar packets twice and reorganized the pie fridge, even though no one had touched a slice since noon. She was wiping the counter, not because it needed it, but because movement kept her from thinking. When the doorbell rang, Caleb. He was a few minutes earlier than usual, wearing the same worn leather jacket, but this time with a navy scarf loosely wrapped around his neck. There was a bit of stubble on his jaw that hadn't been there the day before. He looked tired, but his eyes found her immediately. "Storm's coming," he said, sliding onto his usual stool. "So I've heard." Eleanor poured his coffee without asking. "Apple pie's fresh, still warm." He nodded. "That your recommendation or a trap?" She smiled, a small reluctant curve of the lips that felt unfamiliar. "Depends how you feel about cinnamon." That was how it began. Not with a grand gesture, not with a spark that cracked the sky, just a slice of pie and the kind of conversation that lingers. He stayed longer that day, told her he used to work in security consulting, the kind of job you quit when you realize you're better at disappearing than defending. She didn't ask questions. He didn't offer details. Instead, they talked about things that didn't require context. Favorite childhood books, the smell of gasoline on old roads, songs that only made sense when played at night. When the diner closed early due to the storm, Mrs. Landry tossed Eleanor the keys and told her to lock up. Lena had already left to help her grandmother. Eleanor was alone, or so she thought. "Need help closing down?" Caleb's voice broke the silence. She turned. He was still at the counter, hands resting on the wood, looking entirely at home. And yet, there was something in his posture, a gentleness that didn't match his frame, a distance behind the familiarity. "I'm good," she said, "but thank you." "You sure? I've been known to stack chairs like a pro." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but don't mess up the salt shakers. Mrs. Landry's superstitious." He chuckled and began helping. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like an old song played softly in the background. As they moved between booths and countertops, Eleanor caught herself watching him. Not just the way he moved, but the way he paused before speaking, the way his eyes softened when he smiled. When everything was done, they stood by the front door. Outside, the wind had picked up, sweeping dry leaves across the sidewalk in quick spirals. "I'll walk you upstairs," Caleb offered, not as a question. Eleanor should have said no. She should have thanked him and closed the door behind her. But instead, she nodded, and they climbed the stairs in quiet. At the top, she turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The little room looked smaller with him standing near the doorway, more fragile. She stepped inside and turned back. "Thanks again." He didn't leave right away. He looked at her for a moment. A long, searching kind of look. Not intrusive, but grounding, like he was memorizing her face. "You look like someone who used to be a storm," he said quietly, and then forgot. Eleanor blinked. He offered a small smile, nodded once, and stepped away, disappearing down the stairs. She stood there long after the door had closed. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't. And in the calm that followed, she realized something far more dangerous than heartbreak was beginning to unfold. She was starting to feel again. It started with little things. The first time, Eleanor didn't even register it. Caleb had left his wallet on the counter after his usual breakfast. She noticed it just as he was pulling away on his black motorcycle. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that looked older than it should and sounded like gravel when it moved. She ran outside to catch him, but he was already gone. So, she opened it, just enough to see the ID and confirm it was his, except it wasn't. The name on the card read, Caleb Jensen. Not right. The address was in Arizona. The photo matched. The eyes, the jawline, even the scowl, but the name was wrong. She closed it, heart stuttering, unsure whether she should be alarmed or embarrassed. Maybe Wright was a middle name. Maybe Jensen was the legal one. Maybe, she didn't know. And when he came in the next day, smiling like nothing had happened, she didn't ask. But the seed had been planted. Then came the phone call. Mrs. Landry had stepped out. Lena was in the back. The diner phone rang, a landline barely used anymore. Eleanor picked up. Maplewood Diner, she said. Silence. Then, he's not who he says he is. A female voice, calm, measured, no background noise, no context, just that one sentence, delivered like a scalpel. Before Eleanor could respond, the line went dead. She held the receiver a moment longer than necessary, heart racing, throat dry. She checked the caller ID. Unknown number. She told no one. But after that, she began watching. And the more she watched Caleb, the more the cracks began to show. He never stayed in town past sunset. He avoided phone calls. Even the occasional one he did answer. He'd step outside and lower his voice. He never talked about family or friends, or even what he was doing in Maplewood in the first place. One afternoon, Eleanor passed by the garage near the gas station, where he often stopped for coffee to go. She wasn't trying to follow him. She just happened to be walking back from the library. That's what she told herself. She saw him talking to someone. Not laughing, not casual, but intense. The man looked angry. Caleb grabbed him by the collar, pushed him back against the wall, said something low and sharp, then just let go, stepped back, and walked away. Eleanor stood frozen. The image burned into her mind. That night, he didn't come to the diner. The following morning, when he returned, he smiled like usual. But Eleanor couldn't help noticing the bruise near his collarbone. Faint, but fresh. She didn't ask, and he didn't explain. But a shift had occurred. Subtle, cold. One evening, while closing, Lena leaned against the counter and said, "He's cute, sure, but don't fall in love with a man you don't know how to Google." Eleanor laughed, but it felt brittle, because she had tried to search him. No social media, no LinkedIn, no traces. Nothing matched the name Caleb Wright. Jensen brought up a few possibilities, but none she could link directly to him. He didn't exist, or at least, not in the way he appeared to. And yet, when he looked at her, when he handed her a cup of coffee with that soft smile, when he paused before speaking as if weighing every word, he didn't feel like a threat. He felt like a ghost trying to be human again. But ghosts carry stories, and some stories don't want to be told. The kiss didn't happen with fireworks. There was no music swelling in the background, no dramatic pause. Just a moment, small, unplanned, honest. It was late. The diner had closed. The summer air outside was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the power had gone out due to a blown transformer. Eleanor had lit 3 candles in mason jars and set them on the counter. She was sitting on a stool, her hair loosely tied, a smear of flour on her cheek from the pie dough she'd been kneading. Caleb stood across from her, sipping tea, quiet. They weren't talking about anything important. The conversation drifted. Weather, books, a movie he half remembered, the sound of storms on tin roofs. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "You smile more now." Eleanor blinked. "You didn't when I first came here," he added. "You were polite. Beautiful, sure, but locked up tight. Now it's different. Like the real you sneaks out sometimes." She looked down. Maybe I forgot who that was. He reached out, brushing the flour from her cheek with the back of his hand. "I don't think she's gone. Just recovering." That was the moment. Soft, unforced. Their lips met briefly. No pressure, no promises. And when they parted, neither rushed to explain. He rested his forehead against hers for a second before stepping back. No declarations, no expectations. But everything shifted after that. Eleanor found herself listening more closely to his voice, noticing the way he tapped his finger twice on the counter when thinking, the way he always checked the exits, even in calm spaces, the way his gaze sometimes drifted far, far away, as if haunted by places he wouldn't name. They didn't talk about the kiss, but something between them had been marked, and yet, barriers remained. He never invited her anywhere, never asked personal questions. When she once mentioned her past, vaguely, carefully, he didn't lean in. He changed the subject, gently, but firmly. She began to wonder if she was the only one trying to move forward, or if he was simply using her as a temporary shelter. One evening, she brought him a slice of cherry pie to go, wrapped in foil. Thought you might like something sweet later. He hesitated, took it, smiled. But the next day when she asked, "Was it good?" he answered, "Didn't get a chance to try it." No explanation, no apology, just a wall. The more Eleanor leaned in, the more he seemed to quietly step back. And still, she couldn't stay away. Because with Caleb, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, of things unspoken, of things unfinished. And that was what terrified her most. Not that he was hiding something, but that maybe she wanted to keep pretending he wasn't. The first real clue came from a stranger. It was a Wednesday. Rain clung to the windows of the diner like condensation on old glass. The air smelled of burnt toast and wet pavement. Eleanor was refilling ketchup bottles behind the counter when a man in his late 40s walked in. Khakis, windbreaker, eyes that flicked around too quickly. He didn't look like a local. He took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee, and scanned the room once, twice, before settling on Caleb, who was sitting in his usual corner booth with a notebook open. Their eyes locked. Caleb stiffened. The man raised his cup slightly, a silent greeting. Caleb didn't respond, didn't move, just stared back with that slow, unreadable calm that Eleanor was starting to recognize as his version of panic. The man finished his coffee in 5 minutes, didn't speak to anyone else, left a $10 bill and disappeared into the mist. Caleb closed his notebook, didn't touch his coffee. He stood, walked to the counter and muttered, "I have to go." Something came up. Eleanor wanted to ask, but something in his posture warned her not to. Later that night, she found the notebook he had left behind, forgotten, or maybe intentionally abandoned. She hesitated, then opened it. Most of the pages were blank. A few had sketches, not of people but of exits, floor plans, maps. One page had a name scribbled again and again, Mira. Some pages were torn out. She closed it, heart hammering. The next morning, Caleb returned as if nothing had happened. When she handed him the notebook, he simply nodded. Thanks. No explanation. She didn't ask. But her silence was louder now. Another clue came when Lena mentioned casually, "You know he parks his bike 2 blocks over, right? Always. Like he doesn't want anyone to see it out front." Eleanor frowned. "Why?" Lena shrugged. "I don't know. Just weird." And then there was the motel incident. Mrs. Landry had asked Eleanor to drop off a bag of groceries at the local inn, a favor for one of the elderly tenants. On her way out, she passed room 6. The door was cracked open. Inside, she saw Caleb, shirtless, bruised, stitching a wound on his own shoulder in front of a mirror. On the table beside him, a gun, a burner phone, a folded passport. She froze. He didn't see her. She stepped away before he could. That night, she lay awake in her small room, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't have enough corners for. Who was he running from? What was he running toward? The audience already knows the answer. The man from the diner? He wasn't just a drifter. He was someone who'd disappeared before. Someone trained to vanish, to lie, to observe without being seen. Someone who didn't park out front because somewhere, someone might still be looking. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but Caleb Wright didn't exist. And Mira, the name scrawled in the notebook, wasn't just a memory. It was a warning. It didn't take long for Eleanor's life in Maplewood to start unraveling. Again. The first blow came from Deputy Ross. He'd always been too curious, always lingering a little too long when she refilled his coffee. But now, his question sharpened. "I ran your name," he said one morning, casually, as if discussing the weather. "There's nothing criminal, but you were married to the Nathaniel Ashford, weren't you?" Eleanor froze. Ross smiled. "Don't worry, I won't tell." Yet, she didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was confirmation enough. "I'm just saying," he continued, leaning in, lowering his voice. "You being here, it's a bit of a story, huh? Ashford money, then boom, waitress in a ghost town? People'll wonder." It was a threat dressed as conversation. She told Mrs. Landry later, quietly, without details. The older woman pursed her lips, wiped her hands on her apron, and said only, Men like that push until you push back. But Eleanor wasn't ready to push. Not yet. Then, 2 days later, Irene Carter returned to the diner. She hadn't been in for weeks, but this time, she arrived with purpose. A well-folded newspaper tucked under her arm, and a smug look behind her perfectly applied lipstick. She sat at the counter, ordered chamomile tea, and placed the newspaper where Eleanor could see it. On the society page, a photo of Nathaniel Ashford, alone. Headline, Ashford to launch new charitable initiative after difficult year. Irene sipped her tea. He looks thinner, she said. Tragedy tends to do that. What a shame. Such a handsome man left behind. Eleanor didn't react. Irene leaned in. You're not the only one hiding things, sweetheart. That man of yours, he's not exactly invisible. Eleanor stiffened. Excuse me? Oh, come on. Irene smiled. He's not from around here. No records, no past. And you, with your storybook last name, and the eyes of a woman trying very hard not to scream. It's all very poetic. Eleanor walked away, but the poison had already been planted. Later that night, she confronted Caleb. You lied to me, she said, her voice trembling. Your name, the notebook, the motel, the bruises. He didn't deny it, just looked tired. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. Is that supposed to comfort me? No. A pause. It's supposed to protect you. That broke something. Not because of the secrecy, but because she could feel it. He believed it. Believed that shutting her out was a form of care, that his silence was a shield. I don't want to be protected, she said. I want the truth. He looked at her, long and hard. You're not ready for it. And then he walked out. The next morning, she found a manila envelope taped to her door. Inside, printed photos. Blurry surveillance images of Caleb, in different towns, at different times, with different names. No message, no sender. Eleanor sat on her bed, photos spread out like a deck of lies, and asked herself the question that had been waiting for days. What if loving him meant betraying herself again? It happened in the most ordinary way. Saturday afternoon. The diner was half full. Eleanor was behind the counter, refilling cups, pretending her hands weren't shaking. Caleb hadn't been in for 3 days. Not since the night of the confrontation. Not since she said, I want the truth, and he chose silence instead. She was trying to move through the motions. Coffee, pie, smile, repeat. When the door opened and the bell jingled like always. But this time, it wasn't Caleb. It was her. Tall, striking, dark hair in a tight braid, military posture, a black coat, dusty from travel. She walked in like she owned oxygen. The woman glanced around the diner, eyes scanning until they landed on Eleanor. She walked straight up to the counter and set something down between them. A photograph of Caleb, standing beside the woman, smiling. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The woman spoke calmly. My name is Mira Jensen. I'm his wife. A pause. Or, I was. Every sound in the diner faded, forks clinking, people talking, the bell on the door. All of it dissolved into a deafening stillness. Eleanor stared at the photo. Same eyes, same smile, same man. Her throat closed. That's not possible. I thought the same thing, Mira said. Until I found him in a surveillance image 6 states away. Until I started tracking his aliases. Until I realized he wasn't just hiding from me. He was hiding from everyone. She slid another photo forward. A different woman, blonde, laughing, wrapped in Caleb's arms. This one's from 4 years ago. Her name was Elise. She thought she was his fiancée. Eleanor didn't move. Mira leaned in. He finds women like us, broken, smart, hiding from something. He studies us. Then he becomes whatever we need. Why? Eleanor whispered. Mira shrugged. I thought it was emotional manipulation. But lately, I'm not sure. There may be something else. Something deeper. Money? Revenge? Maybe he's just addicted to reinvention. Where is he now? I don't know. Mira's tone dropped. But I will. She stood, collected the photos, and left one final image on the counter. A grainy surveillance shot of Caleb entering what looked like a warehouse, time-stamped 3 nights ago. The same night, he vanished. Mira walked out without another word. Eleanor stood behind the counter for a full 5 minutes before she realized she was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent, stunned tears running down her cheeks, like something inside her had cracked in two. Later, she would find herself walking the streets of Maplewood like a ghost, retracing steps, questioning every conversation, every glance, every word Caleb had ever spoken. None of it felt real anymore. The man she had kissed, trusted, nearly fallen for, didn't exist. And if he did, the question wasn't whether he lied. It was whether anything he'd shown her was ever true. She didn't show up for work the next day, nor the day after that. Mrs. Landry didn't call. Lena left a bag of cookies on her doorstep with a note that said, "Don't disappear." That's his thing. But Eleanor didn't open the door. She couldn't, not because of shame, but because she no longer trusted the floor beneath her. The walls of her small room seemed to close in, inch by inch. The reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable, not because she looked disheveled or weak, but because she looked like someone who had dared to believe in something again, and paid the price. She had opened herself, let herself feel, kissed him, trusted him, and he had fractured her, not with violence, not even with betrayal in the traditional sense, but with illusion, with intimacy that had been designed, rehearsed, delivered like a script, written by someone who knew exactly where her wounds were. She sat on the floor of the shower until the water ran cold. She tried to write anything, but the words refused to come. Everything sounded hollow, like an echo of someone else's voice. On the third day, she walked to the woods behind the diner. It was quiet there, just trees, wind, and her own ragged breathing. She stood at the edge of the lake, remembering the time Caleb had pointed out a heron perched on a rock, and said, "Funny how they stay so still, like they're waiting for the world to catch up." Was that what he was doing with her? Waiting for her to catch up to the truth? She picked up a rock and threw it into the water, hard, then another, and another, until her arms ached, until her throat gave out from screaming without sound. That night, she lit the photographs on fire, all of them, Mira's images, surveillance shots, the one of Caleb with the blonde, the one with Mira herself, even the one she'd secretly kept in her drawer, the one Caleb had drawn of her silhouette behind the diner window. She burned them all, and still, it wasn't enough, because the real wound wasn't the lies. It was the possibility that some part of it had been real, that the warmth in his voice, the softness in his gaze, the way he reached for her without asking, that maybe, just maybe, those moments hadn't been scripted. And if they were, then maybe she wasn't mourning a man. Maybe she was mourning herself, the version of her that dared to believe again. The turning point didn't come with answers. It came with a decision. 4 days after Mira's visit, Eleanor received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Caleb's. Inside the envelope was a single page. No greeting, no signature. Just one sentence, written in blue ink. "I never meant to hurt you, but I never should have stayed." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no closure. Eleanor read it once, then again. Then she folded it into quarters and placed it in the trash. But something inside her shifted. She had spent days waiting, for him to return, for Mira to call, for someone to tell her what to do. She had cried, she had broken, but now there was only silence. And in that silence, she realized she had a choice. She could stay in this version of herself, the woman always reacting, always rebuilding from someone else's destruction, or she could become something else entirely. She got up, took a long shower, and for the first time in weeks, put on lipstick. Red. The diner was quiet that morning. Lena raised an eyebrow as Eleanor walked in. "Well, damn," she said. "You look like someone who just fired her therapist and burned a love letter." Eleanor smiled. "Close enough." She took her apron, rolled up her sleeves, and got back to work. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Landry pulled her aside and handed her a small package. "Came for you this morning. No name. Just said it was urgent." Eleanor opened it in the back room. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No markings. She stared at it for a long moment before plugging it into the diner's office computer. There was only one file, a video. The image was grainy, taken from a security camera. It showed Caleb, or whatever his name really was, standing in a warehouse, talking to someone Eleanor didn't recognize. Their conversation had no audio, but their body language told a story. At the end of the footage, Caleb shoved the man against a wall, said something sharp, and stormed out. The timestamp matched the night he disappeared. Then the screen went black. A second later, New footage began. It was Caleb again, but this time, he wasn't hiding. He was speaking directly to the camera. The audio clicked on. "I don't know how much of what I gave you was real to you," he said. His voice was hoarse, raw, but it was real to me. "You weren't the job. You were the detour I never expected to need." Eleanor leaned in. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I can tell you this. If Mira's talking to you, she's not just trying to warn you. She's trying to use you." The screen froze. End of file. Eleanor sat still. Mira, the woman who had claimed to be his wife, who had brought the photos, the stories, the heartbreak, wasn't just a ghost from Caleb's past. She might still be part of his present. Or worse, part of something Eleanor had never seen coming. Maplewood had always been a quiet town, but now, the quiet was different. It wasn't peace, it was suffocation. After the video, Eleanor didn't return to the diner. She didn't answer Lena's texts. She didn't open the door when Mrs. Landry knocked and left a small container of soup on the doormat with a note that simply read, "Don't disappear, Elle. We've seen enough ghosts." But Eleanor already felt like one. She stopped sleeping. Or maybe she did. In shallow, half-aware dreams, filled with fragments of Caleb's voice, Mira's eyes, Nathaniel's cold hands, and the silence between all of them. Time lost meaning. Morning bled into dusk. Coffee went cold before she remembered to drink it. The mirror became a stranger's witness. The little dresser drawer where she'd once folded her clothes with care now sat half open, untouched. And then came the email. From an encrypted account. No subject line. No message. Just an attachment. A PDF file titled, Whitmore Estate Holdings. Confidential. It was a full audit. Not of Eleanor's current life, but of her past. Her family's assets. Her late father's business agreements. Holdings she thought had been closed years ago. But at the bottom, in red ink, was a note. Ashford & Cohen, currently in litigation to acquire dormant Whitmore trust assets via undisclosed clause activated through spousal privilege. She read it again, and then she understood. Nathaniel hadn't just married her for appearances. He had married her to access something dormant, something buried deep within the folds of family law and old money legacy, something he'd waited years to activate. The divorce papers he never signed? Not a delay? A strategy? Her entire life had been a chessboard, and she was the piece that never saw the hand moving her. She printed the document and stared at it for hours. A part of her wanted to scream, throw the paper into the fireplace and forget, but the other part, the one her father had shaped with quiet integrity and sharp logic, knew she couldn't ignore this. It was never just about Caleb. Nathaniel was still playing, and she was still letting him. That night, she wandered into the woods again. The air was cold enough to bite. Frost had begun to settle on the edges of fallen leaves. She sat on the same boulder where Caleb once said, "Funny how some things stay still just long enough for you to notice they're broken." She laughed. It came out like a cough. Everything felt broken now. Her past, her identity, her sense of safety, her ability to trust. But there, in the deep dark of that forest, another truth came clearer than ever before. She was still waiting to be saved. And she was done waiting. The next morning, she dressed with purpose. Black jeans, leather boots, a gray coat that belonged to her mother, the one she'd left buried at the bottom of her bag when she arrived in Maplewood. She walked to the diner not to work, but to face the things she'd abandoned. Lena was behind the counter. She looked up, eyes widening. "Jesus, you look like you've been through a hurricane." "I have," Eleanor said simply. Mrs. Landry appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands. "You ready to stop hiding?" Eleanor nodded. "Not just from here." She handed Mrs. Landry the printed file. "I need help." Mrs. Landry read it. Her jaw tightened. "That bastard. You want a lawyer?" "I want a war." For the first time in weeks, Lena smiled. Now that's the Elle I knew was hiding under all that Grace Kelly composure. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just opened the back office, pulled out the town's legal directory, and started making calls. The next storm didn't come from the sky. It came in a black SUV with tinted windows, parked outside the diner at 6:47 a.m. Eleanor was inside, helping Mrs. Landry prepare the first round of coffee, when she saw the vehicle pull in and sit, engine running, unmoving, for 10 minutes. No one stepped out. No one knocked. Just sat, facing the window, like a threat in neutral. Lena peeked over Eleanor's shoulder. You expecting visitors? No. Want me to get my bat from the back? Eleanor almost smiled. Almost. But her hands were already trembling. At 7:01 a.m., the SUV finally drove off. Slowly. Deliberately. As if to say, we know where you are. It didn't have plates. That afternoon, she received a message on her phone. Unknown number. No text. Just a link to a news article. Mira Jensen, former defense intelligence contractor under federal investigation. Below the headline, an image of the same woman who had walked into the diner with photos and threats and confident accusations. The article was short, redacted in parts, but one phrase stood out. Multiple identities. Intelligence breaches. Unconfirmed ties to private surveillance firms and offshore asset manipulation. Eleanor stared at the screen, the letters blurring. What if the lie wasn't Caleb? What if the lie was Mira? Her mind reeled back to the visit, the photos, the perfect phrasing, the tone of someone used to controlling rooms and stories. Eleanor had believed her because the story made sense, because Caleb's silence fit the shape of Mira's narrative. But now she wasn't sure who was hunting whom. She left the diner early, walked into town, heart pounding, and entered the local records office, a sleepy building with peeling paint, and a clerk who looked like he hadn't blinked in 40 years. I need to find a property, she said. Unlisted. Maybe registered under a holding company. The man blinked. You got a name? I have a face. She opened her phone and showed him a still from the surveillance video. The man Caleb had confronted. The one from the warehouse. It took an hour, but eventually the clerk returned with a file. Thin, dusty, a warehouse outside town limits, leased to a logistics company that didn't exist anymore. Eleanor borrowed Mrs. Landry's truck. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. When she arrived, the warehouse looked abandoned. Vines growing over rusted siding, a broken light fixture dangling near the entrance. But the padlock was new, and there were tire marks in the dirt. She broke in through the side. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and memory. Dust motes floated in the dim shafts of light. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and old surveillance equipment, cameras, phones, files, and in the center of the floor, a single chair, bolted to the ground. Ropes, dried blood. Eleanor backed away slowly, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about lies or broken hearts. This was about something far darker. She stumbled outside, hands shaking, and fumbled for her phone. But before she could dial, she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, heart racing, but there was no one there. Only wind, only trees. But someone had been there recently, someone who wasn't finished. Eleanor didn't go home that night. Instead, she drove. Nowhere in particular, through back roads, past farms and fields, until the sky turned the color of smoke and the trees disappeared into shadow. Her phone vibrated at least a dozen times, but she didn't check it. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She pulled over near a riverbank and stepped out of the truck, letting the wind slap her awake. She stood there, watching the water move, fast, steady, unapologetic, and realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't asking anyone for permission. Not to stay, not to fight, not to fall apart. She was done being careful, done shrinking herself to fit the space others gave her. For too long, she had been the version of a woman others needed, the dutiful wife, the obedient daughter, the polite stranger, the beautiful mystery. And in all that silence, she had forgotten how to scream. But now, she remembered. The next morning, she walked into the diner, not as the shattered woman who once arrived there with trembling hands, but as someone reborn in fire. Lena froze mid-pour when she saw her. Jesus, did you sleep at all? No, Eleanor said, and I don't need to. Mrs. Landry emerged from the kitchen. I saw the truck parked across the river. You okay? No, she smiled, but I will be. She made coffee, took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and made a list, a literal one. 3 columns. Who to trust, who to confront, what to uncover. She placed Mira's name at the top of column 2. Caleb's name went in the middle, alone, underlined twice, with a question mark. By noon, she had accessed a private investigator database using an old Yale contact. By 2, she had printed reports. By 5, she had booked a room under a fake name in a hotel 2 towns over, just in case. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was watching, gathering, preparing. That night, she stood in her room, reading through old news clippings about Ashford & Co. There, buried in the legal jargon, was a name she hadn't expected. Michael Durant, CEO of a shell company used to absorb Whitmore Trust subsidiaries. She remembered him. He'd spoken at her wedding reception, had shaken her hand, had told her, "You married very well." He was Mira's brother. It was all connected. Ashford, Mira, Caleb, the trust, the surveillance, the files. The web wasn't tangled. It was designed. And for the first time, Eleanor wasn't standing at the center, waiting to be devoured. She was walking along the edges, holding a flame. The next morning, she didn't open the diner. She left a note for Mrs. Landry. "Thank you for giving me a place to disappear. Now I need to reappear, on my own terms." Then she drove to Boston, to the law firm that once handled her father's estate, to the bank where the dormant trust had been sleeping, to the court clerk's office to file a motion for emergency injunction, blocking Nathaniel's access to any asset connected to her name. It was the first time in years she signed her full name, Eleanor Whitmore Ashford, not out of pride, but because she was reclaiming it before burning it down. The return wasn't dramatic. No trench coat, no thunderstorm, no music swelling in the background. Eleanor simply pulled up to Maplewood in a rented sedan, parked in front of the diner, and stepped out as if she'd never left. Except everything about her had changed. The posture, the eyes, the silence that used to feel like fragility now pulsed with intent. Lena saw her first. She stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands. "You look like someone who's about to blow up a building." Eleanor half smiled. "I've already filed the paperwork." Mrs. Landry followed. "Did you find what you needed?" "Not yet, but I know where to look." They didn't ask questions. Not that she expected them to. She didn't stay long, just enough to let them know she was back. Not as a runaway, but as someone who had chosen to return. By late afternoon, she was outside the warehouse again, this time with gloves, a flashlight, and a crowbar. The front door was padlocked, but she knew how to bypass it now. She moved quickly, methodically, checking every drawer, every file, every box. Most were empty, but one metal cabinet, rusted at the hinges, opened with a shriek to reveal a stack of documents. Some shredded, some stamped with symbols she didn't recognize. One folder was marked, Operation Mirrorfall, Eyes Only. Inside, photos of Mira, of Caleb, of her. Her breath caught. These weren't surveillance photos from town. These were old, some from years ago. One of her in college, one on her wedding day, one, taken just days ago, outside the diner, handing Lena a slice of pie. She wasn't just a pawn. She'd been a target. From the beginning. Behind the folder, taped to the bottom of the drawer, was a flash drive. She took it, pocketed it, and ran. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the hotel room she had rented 2 towns over, turned off her phone, and plugged the drive into her laptop. There was only one file, a video. Caleb appeared on screen, sitting in a room she didn't recognize, blood on his collar, his face bruised. "I don't know how much time I have," he began. "If you're seeing this, it means I failed, or that I finally stopped running." He paused. "I'm not who I told you I was, but I'm not who she says I am either." He inhaled slowly. "Mira and I were married, briefly. She wasn't a publicist. She was intelligence. I got pulled into a program I didn't understand until it was too late. Surveillance, data extraction, emotional infiltration." He looked into the camera. "You were never part of the mission." His voice cracked. "You were the escape hatch." The video cut there, abruptly. No sign-off, no final word, just silence. Eleanor sat frozen. The truth wasn't clean. It wasn't whole, but it was real enough. Caleb had lied, but Mira had built the lie, and now both were gone. She didn't cry. There were no more tears left, only resolve. She stood, picked up her bag, slipped the flash drive into her coat pocket, and walked out of the hotel. There were only 2 places left to go now. 1, to confront Nathaniel, the man who had used her for inheritance and manipulation. 2, to follow the trail Mira left behind, and if necessary, to burn both bridges. She wasn't the legal wife anymore. She wasn't the girl in the photograph. She wasn't the broken woman in hiding. She was what happened when all of them underestimated her. And now, they would see exactly what that mistake would cost. The Ashford building hadn't changed. Same polished glass, same intimidating brass lettering, same security guard who didn't look twice at her as she walked through the revolving doors. As if the scandal, the silence, the escape to Maplewood had all been an extended vacation. Eleanor stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. Her reflection in the mirrored walls stared back at her, eyes sharp, mouth set, hair swept into a clean bun. There was no sign of the woman who had once trembled behind a counter, watching raindrops race down diner windows. The elevator opened with a soft chime, and there he was, Nathaniel Ashford, standing in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows, phone in one hand, tumbler of bourbon in the other. The Manhattan skyline spread out behind him like a throne room. He turned slowly, didn't look surprised. "Eleanor," he said, setting the glass down. "I wondered when you'd reappear." She stepped in, calm. "You always liked the dramatic entrance, Nate. Figured I'd give you one better, the quiet kind." He motioned to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat." She didn't. Instead, she opened her coat, pulled out a slim folder and dropped it on the desk. "Operation Mirrorfall," she said softly. His eyes flicked down, then back to her. "No idea what you're talking about. Try again." A long silence stretched between them. Then Nathaniel sighed and leaned back. "You were never supposed to see that." "No," she said. "I wasn't supposed to see a lot of things. Like how you orchestrated a merger not with me, but through me. Like how you waited until my father died to reactivate the dormant clauses in his trust. Like how you married me because it was cheaper than negotiating with my family." He didn't deny it. "I gave you everything," she said, "and you gave me a cage." He raised an eyebrow. "You lived like a queen, Eleanor. Everything you wore, everything you touched, was bought with manipulation and lies." He stood, now tense. "You don't understand the scale of this, of what I was trying to protect." She stepped closer. "Protect who? Your image? Your position? The illusion that you were something more than a polished shell?" Nathaniel leaned forward. "You walked away from all of it. From power. From legacy. For what? A man who doesn't exist? A town with no future? No." She smiled. "I walked away from you." He narrowed his eyes. "So what now? You think you'll ruin me with some papers and a speech? You're not the first woman to threaten a legacy, Eleanor." She placed a second folder on the desk. "This one contains the injunction I filed this morning, freezing all activity connected to Whitmore assets. I've also submitted formal requests for a federal review of your recent offshore transfers. And I've attached a copy of your premarital agreement, which you illegally altered through a third-party proxy." His face changed, not all at once, but in fragments. The tension in his jaw, the blink that came half a second too slow, the sudden silence. "I have the files," she said, "and I have nothing left to lose." Nathaniel sat. She didn't. "I'm not coming back," she continued. "I don't want the estate. I don't want the house. I don't want your name. I want distance. I want space. And I want to know that the next time you try to use me, it's going to cost you everything." He looked at her, calculating. Then he did something she didn't expect. He smiled. "You've changed." She nodded. "No, I just stopped pretending." A beat. Then she turned and walked away, heels echoing against the marble floor. The sky over Maplewood was the kind of gray that made colors feel exaggerated. The trees too orange. The diner's red neon sign too vivid. Even the cold air had a sharpness to it, like the world had been outlined in ink overnight. Eleanor stood in front of the diner's entrance, coat buttoned up to her chin, bag over her shoulder. She had returned not to stay, but to say goodbye. Lena burst through the door first. "No," she said flatly, arms crossed. "Whatever dramatic farewell speech you have planned, save it. We already laminated your stool. It's a historical artifact now." Eleanor laughed softly. "You're impossible, Mrs. Landry appeared behind her. "You sure about this?" Eleanor nodded. "It's time." She'd made arrangements. A modest apartment in Boston, close to the legal firm that had agreed to help her rebuild her name, not just as a Whitmore, but as Eleanor, whole and separate. A foundation to reopen in her mother's name. A new identity, not forged, not hidden, but chosen. "I needed this place to remember how to be human," she said, her voice catching. "I came here running from everything, and now I'm leaving because I finally stopped." Mrs. Landry didn't hug often, but this time, she pulled Eleanor into her arms and held on like a mother to a daughter she'd secretly adopted. "We were just your hiding place," she whispered. "The world is going to have to handle you now." And then, just as Eleanor stepped away, Lena added, "If you ever get rich and famous and forget us, I'll track you down and pour hot coffee on your shoes." Eleanor smiled. "Deal." She walked away before she could cry, but she didn't get far. Because there, leaning against a rust-colored motorcycle at the corner of the block, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to be just late enough, was Caleb. He looked rough, unshaven, jacket wrinkled, a bruise near his collarbone still healing. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. Eleanor stopped. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she walked up to him. "I thought you were gone," she said. "I was. Why come back?" He took a breath. "Because Mira's gone. For real this time. They're building a case against her. And I had a choice. Run again, or tell the truth." Eleanor folded her arms, unsure if she wanted to scream or fall into him. "Why now?" "Because I don't want to disappear anymore," he said. "Not from you." A long pause. Then she asked, "Who are you, really?" He smiled, sad and soft. "No aliases this time. Caleb Jensen, former intelligence analyst, former idiot, and, if you'll let me, former runner." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I don't know what part of what we had was real," she whispered. "And I don't know if I can trust you. Not fully. I don't expect you to," he said. "But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." She stared at him, at the man who had held her hand in silence, drawn her when she didn't see herself, lied to her, saved her, watched her rebuild herself from nothing, and still showed up when she wasn't sure she wanted him to. Then without a word, she stepped forward and kissed him. Not because it solved everything, but because it didn't have to. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm leaving," she said. "I know, but I'm not disappearing." He nodded. "Neither am I." They stood like that for a while, quiet, breathing, steady. Two people who had burned to ash and come back with nothing to offer but truth. Finally, she whispered, "Come find me when you're ready. For real." And then, with one last look, she turned and walked away. This time, she didn't look back. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to. Months passed, not in silence, but in growth. Eleanor settled into a small apartment with creaky floors and sunlight that poured in through lace curtains. It had uneven shelves and a chipped bathtub, but it was hers, every inch of it. No one else's name on the lease. No legacy, no expectations, no cage disguised as comfort. She took morning walks, read books, sometimes painted. She started a foundation in her mother's name, providing grants to young women pursuing law and arts, girls who, like her, might one day need a map back to themselves. She had coffee in the same corner bookstore every Sunday. Sometimes she brought her laptop, sometimes just a pen and a notebook. The staff knew her name, not because of her family, not because of her scandal, but because she showed up. One day she opened her inbox and found a message from Mira. No subject line, just 2 words. "You won." She stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Victory didn't need to be acknowledged by those who tried to erase her. She didn't hear from Caleb for a long time. And then, one afternoon, she received a small package. Inside, a postcard, a watercolor painting of a heron. No return address, no message, just the image. Still, centered, peaceful. She smiled, not with longing, but with understanding. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with quiet, with peace, with becoming. Because this had never been a story about a man, or a marriage, or a mystery. It had always been a story about a woman remembering who she was before the world told her who to become. A woman who stopped waiting to be saved, and learned to rescue herself. Eleanor walks down a cobbled path in the city park as autumn leaves spiral around her. She's holding a cup of coffee, wearing a wool coat, hair tucked behind her ears. Her face is calm, grounded. She passes a child drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. Scribbles of a house, a bird, and the sun. She stops, smiles. The girl looks up. "Do you like it?" Eleanor crouches beside her. "I love it." The little girl points at the drawing of the bird. "That one's me." Flying away. Eleanor's eyes shimmer. "You'll go far." She stands, turns toward the park exit and walks forward. The camera lingers as she disappears into the crowd, then fades to black. Final phrase on screen. She was never just the wife. She was the storm learning how to fly. Your heart knows the way. Subscribe and follow the beauty.